Good afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome to this Friday afternoon to this PMI live webinar, episode 109. My name is Dennis Crommentuijn-Marsh, and I'm a director consultant with PMI, and I shall be your host today. A warm welcome to all the attendees who have registered today. We have a record number of registrations for this, and I hope you will get something out of this. Not only do we have a record number of registrations for this, also on our LinkedIn, we have now passed the 10,000 subscribers. So thank you to all who are subscribed to us on LinkedIn. So do find us there and join us. As you may know, PMI Live is our monthly live webinar where we cover a large variety of topics from thought leadership, practical application, tools, methods, and of course, case studies. The topics that we choose are based on your feedback, and that's how we then choose what we will cover for the next set of months. Like I said, more than 100 webinars. You can find all these webinars and replay them at your leisure by going to our knowledge hub at pmi.co.uk. And during this webinar, we encourage all of you to actively participate with questions, observations, and insights. If you have a specific question, then please use the Q&A functionality within Teams, which you find in the right-hand corner of your screen. And you can ask specific questions, and I'll then do my best to answer them with the team. Today's session, Agile and Lean Six Sigma in action. So the combination of the two. And Mark and Rob will both showcase an improvement case study that they worked on together. Mark was the lead change agent, and Rob was initially a customer of the process, became then also an active project team member. So before we hand over to both of you, Mark, would you like to start, please, by introducing yourself and what have you been up to recently?
No problem, Dennis. First of all, I'm excited to be here. And what have I been up to recently? Well, a lot of my time has been spent delivering our Lean Six Sigma Yellow Belt training and Green Belt training to clients. And the other part of my time has been spent working on this amazing project that we're going to share with everyone today with Rob. So that's what I've been up to recently.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. Rob.
Hi, everybody. My day job is working within the process delegate onboarding, and for the period of the project then I was full-time working on that project, but I've since gone back to my day job of working with the team that managed this particular operation.
Wonderful. And so thank you both of us. So let's introduce us now to the topic. So Mark, what are we going to cover today?
No problem. Perfect. Yeah, so thanks, Dennis. So what are we going to cover today? So mainly we'll be covering how the Lean Six Sigma and Agile case study that we worked on as a team actually transformed an internal customer service-based process. And there's going to be 4 key parts to that, as you can see in front. And the first one might be quite interesting to a lot of people, but how did psychology play a key part in getting us started on this journey, which will be really interesting. The power, and emphasis on the word power, Dennis, of Lean Six Sigma and Agile methods and tools being used together. Feedback, so some real experiences from process managers, process operators, as well as Rob, who you just said was a customer of this project internally, but also became a team member. So it'd be good to hear from those guys. And then we'll finish off the session by hopefully giving some useful hints and tips to help anyone that's attending today with future improvement initiatives in their own organisation. So that's what we'll be looking to do today.
Excellent.
And first of all, for all those who normally attend the webinars, we will have the standard poll that we're going to do, and we're going to use the tool called Menti. So there is a QR code on screen. Hopefully everyone can see that and they can use their mobile phone. If you can't scan it, then there is a code that you can go to menti.com. Hopefully it's a straightforward question with some hopeful straightforward answers. And the question myself and Rob are looking to get some insight into is the one as follows. So, have you had any experience in delivering a process improvement using both Agile and Lean Six Sigma tools? So the answers are as follows. You've had no experience. I have not used Agile and Lean Six Sigma together for process improvement. Limited experience. I have applied either Agile or Lean Six Sigma separately, but not together. Some experience. I have used both Agile and Lean Six Sigma together in a limited capacity for process improvement. And finally, extensive experience. I have successively integrated Agile and Lean Six Sigma tools to deliver significant process improvements.
Fantastic. So either use your smartphone to scan in the QR code on your screen, or go to menti.com and then enter the code, which is on your screen, also in the chat, 36237827. So whilst they are working on giving us their answer to your question, what is your experience in terms of our clients that we work with in combining Agile with Lean Six Sigma? Rob.
Yeah, so for me, very little noise I hear about Agile within the apprentice world. And actually, my background is in construction project management, where the word Agile is associated with a well-known brand of project management software. So it's a very narrow kind of definition, effectively, that goes with Agile in that sense. So yeah, not much traffic at all, Dennis.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I think from previous experience in previous organisations I worked in, it was starting to touch certain areas of interest in it. Did it ever come to total fruition? Probably not. Was it ever used at the same time as Lean Six Sigma? Not when I was back then. Is it becoming more popular these days? 100%. And yeah, I think this is the first time that I've experienced at PMI anyway, working with both together. So yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing that. So let's go and see maybe some of the results.
Yes.
Potentially. Yes.
So whilst you share the screen, so I think the first time I encountered it and combined it was about 6 years ago when I was working with a UK client where we knew which answer we wanted, but we're not quite sure how to get there. So we went for the sprints design where we had the retrospectives at the end, the reviews. Therefore, we set up the new goals, and then we evolved throughout this multi-month project. So yeah.
Nice. Okay, well, the results are in, everyone. So it looks like I've refreshed it a couple of times. We've got 63 responses. So yeah, I think from the responses, hopefully you can see on screen, from my perspective, that there's probably nothing surprising about these results that I can see. If I was to have a guess before that, then I would have expected to see people say no experience or limited experience. So yeah, I think the answer to that from myself and Rob, hopefully this will be useful, this case study example, to give people a bit more enthusiasm, a bit more confidence in trying to use both together moving forward. So yeah.
Fantastic. And for the people who say some experience and the one person who says extensive experience, do feel free to add your comments or insights whilst you listen to Rob and Mark discussing their case study about your insights, whether to say, yes, we did something similar, or we actually did something different to come to the same outcome. So please use the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get going then. So thank you for everyone for providing their responses. Okay, so we are going to kick off. We're going to take you right back to the very start of the journey. So where did it all begin and what were we actually trying to accomplish with this project? So first of all, the process. What was the process we were looking to improve from an internal perspective? Well, we named it classic verb noun onboard delegate. Yeah. So again, the purpose of this process, as you can see, was to manage and control the enrolment of a delegate, or also known as a learner, onto a specific apprenticeship program with PMI Capella, and you can see a list of those potential or those types of programs below. High level problem, the current process that tended to prioritize focus upon the next immediate program launch of the apprentice, providing a long lead time and a more hands-off customer contact, which Rob will give a bit more detail about in due course. It was a complex process, it was labour intensive, and it required a lot of manual intervention throughout, which is probably one of your standard problems you come up against. Whilst also we identified that people, again, were working in silos. Yeah, we weren't working as a system. We weren't looking to work together to achieve the main aim of that system itself. Therefore, it led to bottlenecks, delays, defects, rework, all the standard kind of types of waste or issues you see in processes. So what was our goal? We had two goals, ultimately to remove waste and streamline the process, to allow the delegates or the learners to receive a more seamless customer experience, no matter what time they started their program on. We then wanted to design and embed some simple but effective onboarding processes that have got clear and concise, apologies, user-friendly, but also uses modern technology. Finally, for me, the most important aspect, which I'll go into in a bit more detail next, but the team. Yeah. So forming the team. It was the first time that we had brought together PMI, the improvement consultants, and also Capella from an apprenticeship's point of view, since becoming one team. So in this aspect, we wanted to bring everyone together because we had one goal to do together and deliver results.
So wonderful. So just on the previous page, in the problem statement, you're talking about in terms of the silos. Can you say a bit more about that? In terms of the problem that you saw today.
Yeah, I think Rob, you might be able to comment on this one in terms of how you think the team used to work, obviously before we improved the process, but from a silo perspective, working on their own, anything that you want to share with the group?
Yeah, I don't think the process is untypical for maybe people listening to this, because it kind of originated in the front end of the business, kind of went into a kind of operational team to kind of manage the process, but then tended to come out towards the end of that process with a delivery team. So we tended to treat that as almost like three separate processes, really, with the teams operating in that kind of those silos. And obviously, what we've now managed to do is to I guess take more of a kind of customer view in that. But that kind of a process that spans the whole of the kind of company effectively isn't as a normal situation, and it kind of creates those kind of silo thinking, really.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. So yeah, on that note, Rob, I'm going to hand over to yourself. So as an internal customer of the process, but then, like we said, an important team member of the project, would you like to give just a bit of insight in terms of the baseline measures and some baseline performance of what we came up against before we moved on?
Yeah, I mean, sure. For us, the onboarding process had a number of steps in it, and it had an end position. So not surprisingly, the kind of the things that were being measured effectively was the status position for all of the learners within that process on where they were. So it was a very visual tool. It showed learners, it showed steps, and it showed when they passed through those steps. So you could look at this visually. It was quite labor intensive to create. It's been created in Excel, which I guess again will resonate with some people. And the green picture you can see there effectively showing that status report. And we used that quite heavily to make sure that the next program that was due to be launched, the learners were ready to be launched on that. So we pretty much used that as a means to make sure everybody that should be over the line was over that line. And we then used the data in that kind of manual sheet to count the number of learners that passed the end of that process, so the ones that completed onboarding. So they were real results measures. They were weekly measures because that was the amount of time it took us to create them effectively was fairly significant. But the key bit that we weren't measuring was the number of learners that didn't complete the process. We weren't able to use this information to meaningfully look at where any of the kind of bottlenecks might be. So for us, there were results measures that were fairly clunky and not necessarily that easy to work with, but that's where we were at the time.
Perfect.
And by the way, to all the people attending, we are sharing some screenshots here with you of some of the process steps. You will notice some of the elements are blanked out, of course, because we want to protect any confidential information, but hopefully the story here, and that's the important part, will be clear to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Dennis. Okay, so for anyone that knows me personally, or even from a work perspective, knows how passionate I am about the fundamental principles of Lean Six Sigma. And this was our route that I started on with Rob and team to move forward in this project to see what was actually possible. And I went back to looking at the system of profound knowledge. So for any improvement practitioner, especially that's been through our training at PMI, will know that Deming was asked to summarise his life's work into one model, which he called the system of profound knowledge, which is pretty much the foundation in which all of our lean thinking is based on. The one lens I want to focus on that supported me and gave me inspiration to move forward and do what we did was psychology. I'm a big sports fanatic outside work, mainly football, but for me, psychology is really important. So tapping into the power of people and how successful they can be as a team is super, super important to achieve results. So starting off with something called intrinsic motivation, and hopefully you can see this on screen. What does that actually mean and why is that important? But so it's doing something because you find it enjoyable or personally fulfilling, driven by an internal desire rather than external rewards or pressure. And to go along with that, for me, was this quote from Michael Jordan. It's one of my favourite quotes. I use it in football, I use it in work on many occasions. Talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence wins championships. So you're probably thinking, well, why is that important, Mark? And why did that inspire you to go and do what you did? Well, I believe that if we're looking to achieve successful results, we need to do it as a team. And also to do that, we would need to follow two different approaches, the Lean Six Sigma improvement cycle approach, as well as the Agile methodology approach. I will just read out the definition that I've got. There's many definitions probably of Agile, but the one here, a framework to create a collaborative, flexible, and productive environment, whilst embedding a working mindset which helps respond to changing requirements, an approach that is followed to get work done with maximum flexibility and minimum constraints. So for me, those two together would be so powerful, and hopefully what we'll show you in a minute can demonstrate that to everyone.
And just to, on that point of psychology, because this is, of course, what we major in, the change management piece, when we do any kind of transformation, small scale or large scale, we need to use the people in the process, like Rob.
Correct. Yeah, super, super important. And we'll touch upon that when we start to talk about, again, our team and who was involved. But yeah, 100% agree, Dennis, in terms of bringing the right people on board and getting them to work together in a consistent and aligned way is super important. Perfect. So let's dig a bit deeper then. So Lean Six Sigma and Agile working together. How did we go about utilising these different approaches that we had at our disposal? Because it's not, again, a common thing, like we've seen at the start, that everyone does do. So where does it fit with each other? So first of all, then, we started off with the standard improvement cycle from a Lean Six Sigma perspective. And we started off by either defining the problem or selecting our priorities using some standard tools and techniques that you should hopefully be familiar with. Project charter, forming that team, who's going to be on it from an operator's perspective, a manager perspective, other key people. And we had a look at the high-level process by using our SIPOC tool. So I want to start to bring Rob into this, because Rob, like we know now, was a key member of this Andy customer throughout this whole journey. So Rob, I've just got a question to ask you, and hopefully you don't mind answering to give everyone insight. So at this stage, what was the most exciting part about identifying the problem and the goal of what we're trying to accomplish of the project?
I think the answer for me is a surprising answer for you, Mark, maybe, is that initially it was the scope that we agreed, because for me, the scope being set, there's a complete end-to-end from a delegate and a customer point of view, because this was a process that spanned across many functions within our business. And it would have been really easy for you to effectively apply a more inwardly focus into an operational part of that process. So when the senior decision was taken to do this from a complete end-to-end customer point of view, we both knew that this effectively would have a really big impact on where we're headed with this. So for me, to take that kind of bigger decision and then to challenge that completely from a customer point of view, I think was quite an exciting moment. And for me, it kind of added bits in that we know about now about all of those kind of early guiding and maximizing those conversations that we have early with the customer, right the way through to avoiding any duplication for the customer who was going to come into this as a result of that. So probably a surprising answer, but yes, the scope.
That's great. No, thanks for sharing. Really insightful. Thanks, Rob. And then as a team, as you know, we moved into the measure phase where we wanted to learn more about the process by doing important Gemba walks. We mapped processes, we interviewed customers, and we verified, again, performance, the standard stuff you'd see at any sort of, again, green belt level project. So again, Rob, I'm going to come back to you. For the measure phase, was there anything in particular that stood out for you when we started to learn more about that end-to-end process that you mentioned? Was there anything that stood out for you?
Yeah, I think, again, it's easy to look back now and answer that question, but I'm not sure I could have answered that midway through. But for me, prior to the project, there probably wasn't one single person in the company that knew that process end to end. And that may sound surprising, but given the kind of nature of this and how it goes through our business. So again, that stood out for me, the fact that, we were working on a process that needed those kind of lots of people to pull in. I think in specific terms, I wasn't surprised that the workshops picked up variations in terms of the way of working that was going on compared to the process that was written. But I was really surprised that what the workshops picked up was variation in ways of working for people in the same role. That was quite surprising. And for me, although the kind of key stages were fixed, the actual engagements with the customer and the experience of that customer would have varied as a result.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it just made me think about a quote that hopefully everyone's familiar with. But if you don't know what you're doing as a process, then you don't know what you're doing. So I think, again, from that perspective, I think you just explained that really well. Perfect.
And just a question to both of you, back to those Gemba walks, the place where the real work is happening. How did you do that?
I'll take that one, Dennis. For me, it was, again, because I believe I formed my team correctly, I identified the right people to bring on board from the very start in the selecting priorities phase. It was easy enough for me to link into the people who were either owning a process, managing it, or operating that process, and set up some, again, individual time with them to get their view of how the process worked. And then we had a collaborative session when we looked at all the different processes, which we did identify, like Rob said, some variation in terms of ways of working, that we didn't have a best known way that was giving us the issue that we had.
And did you come together physically or virtually?
Virtually at this point in time, yeah. A lot of things are done via Teams and some collaborative platforms like Miro, which I'll mention later on. But yeah, it was really beneficial and worked really well.
Good, thank you.
No problem. And then Rob, so again, I'm going to come back to you, but the analyze phase, or when we investigated sources of waste specifically in this project, was there any real, what I call eye-opening issues that you identified or we identified as a team that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think we were really focused on getting the next learners onto the next program, in kind of sufficient numbers in that respect. And we had really good delegate feedback on that. But because we didn't really have any measures, we weren't that good at getting any data about the learners that didn't get to the end of that process. And we definitely hadn't worked out why so many learners reached the end of their onboarding process and then may change programs as a result of that kind of onboarding process, at the end. But we did know that the kind of late changes that were being done in that sense didn't make it very easy for us to optimize the programs that we were kind of running, for me. And in terms of detail, there were probably two stages where it was necessary to have a real engagement with the learner and potentially the line manager. One stage was during a kind of key identity eligibility requirement where we had to arrange calls with learners. And later in the process, there was a moment from a suitability point of view where we would sit virtually with the learner and the line manager. We would review their information, we'd agree their individualized training plan, but that was a very difficult part of the process. Most of our apprentices, or most of our learners are apprentices, and apprentices, they work at the same time that they learn, so they're very busy people. But it was very difficult to manage and schedule those meetings in that middle of that process. But it was a necessary thing that we had to do. So for us, from the workshop stuff that you did, Mark, identifying the amount of time it was taking, and that part of the process needed many emails to flow. It was one of those bits of the process that all of the emails that needed to go out in terms of we're all away from the process and not part of that process. But so that stage in terms of the amount of resource and the amount of frustration that was causing was probably big source of waste, and the data that we got, big surprise coming out. Really.
No, amazing. No, thank you so much for sharing the level of detail, Rob. 100%. And that led us into the next part, which will excite hopefully everybody, is where do we see Agile playing a part? And for me, again, this is my view, my opinion from previous experience. And like I said at the start, I felt that this part here, in terms of the improve phase, when we go to test theories, study results, and then implement, was an ideal opportunity to bring some of the Agile methodology, not all of it, but an essence of it, to help us work through that implementation phase pretty much. So we're going to dig a bit deeper now into that and let you know about the power of Agile and how that actually helped us to make a difference. So, as it says here, yes, utilising the power of Agile and how did it play a part? So, as you can see, I'm a big believer in quotes. I gave you the Michael Jordan quote earlier on. Here's one from Steve Jobs. Hopefully everyone knows who Steve Jobs is, the co-founder of Apple. And he says here, great things in business are never done by one person. They are done by a team of people. Yeah? And for me, again, that's what Agile helps to support 100%. So again, we got together with the team, we generated solutions, we prioritized them, and we got them signed off by working with our sponsor. And as you can see in the small image there, that was standard stuff like ease impact matrices, brainstorming, etc. So nothing really different. However, we then started to take an essence of Agile when we started to think about, well, how do we take some of these probably bigger solutions that are quite scary for teams to go and implement, and when it's maybe not their go-to thing to do, we planned them, we split them up into work streams, we gave each one a specific goal, maybe known as a product goal from an Agile perspective, and we took the essence, like I keep saying, of these bi-weekly sprints or this sprint approach. And what I've done is I've kind of named two specific parts of that, which was something called an epic and something called a user story, which again is taken from Agile. And I've just put a little definition of each, which again, from my perspective, is how I see this, which I'll read out. So an epic was a large piece of work or a solution that would be broken down into smaller, more incremental tasks called user stories that we could then complete over sprints. And then a user story itself, we started to kind of develop these and educate a team on these to say, well, these are written as short requirements or requests from the end user's perspective, which really, really helped us. But not to forget PDSA. So again, PDSA was at the heart of all of this, no matter if we're talking Agile or Lean Six Sigma. We then wanted to make sure that for every epic or every small user story across those sprints, that we would continuously think about, plan, do, study, and act before we make those decisions as a team. How did we manage it? Well, we managed it and tested solutions and implemented key deliverables by embedding some key structured sessions from the Agile meeting cadence. Hopefully some of you may be familiar with it. If not, there were three. There was a start of week sprint huddle where the team got together on a Monday and we started to talk about the week ahead or the sprint ahead in terms of actions and activities we had to do. The end of week sprint review where we got together to review progress towards the bi-weekly sprint. And then we had an end of sprint showcase, which was to showcase and demonstrate some of the good work that had been delivered within that sprint itself. So that's what we did. I'm going to come back to Rob. I'm going to ask you another question, Rob. I hope you don't mind. But for me, the question is, so for you, Rob, what was the most rewarding part of following something new to you and as an Agile approach as part of this phase? What was the most rewarding part?
Well, if I can answer this twice, then if that's all right, Mark.
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
I mean, as an overall, I think using the skill and the experience of the guys that operated the process through that kind of defined phase, I mean, that engagement was invaluable. But then having a kind of assigned the kind of these guys, including myself, as the kind of work stream leads to work their way through the kind of final detailed design and through the implementation. I mean, the Agile framework completely unlocked that for these guys and myself. But what that meant was not only from an ownership point of view, but for us to kind of see that project through in that kind of sense, leading those individual work streams and having the ability to do that through Agile meant that we got kind of deliver those final stages at the end of the project. And that's where the kind of self-reward comes from. So to me, given the kind of day-to-day operation that we were under and doing this at the same time, we wouldn't have done that without that kind of agile framework, I'm sure. A more specific one, and I made reference to it earlier, is we managed to work within this. We managed to work with our own PMI IT team to do some really standard Microsoft, in fact, they're off-the-shelf kind of tools to allow the self-booking of these problem calls that we had with these learners and line managers. And having identified it as a really major opportunity from the work that you did, Mark, it was probably the most rewarding because the solution from the PMI IT guys was very simple. But of course, it was a big problem that we resolved. So for me, it was rewarding in a bang for the buck kind of sense as an individual action. But yeah, so the two-part answer.
Yeah, love it. No, thank you for sharing. Great. So it's been amazing, obviously, me giving you questions, you giving me answers, and hopefully the audience are enjoying the responses from you. But I think it's also super important. We mentioned the process managers, process operators. So I think it's also important that we go and hear a bit about what they felt about it from their experience. So the so what of this.
So
Sorry,
before
Dennis,
we go there,
yeah,
I have a question. And perhaps for the eagle-eyed amongst us, when you look at the end of sprint showcase screenshot versus the team members, there are some different faces here. There are more faces in that small screenshot on the right-hand side. So whom else did you involve in this end of sprint showcase?
Yeah, I'll give my answer first, and then Rob, if you want to give yours, great. So I think, and this is to everybody listening in, when you're forming your team as part of the define phase or the select priorities phase, you will pick the people that you feel are best placed to support you on that project at that time. And that is fine. And they can change as you go through the improvement cycle. When you start to follow an agile approach at the improve phase, they can change. However, the additional people we had on here were more, I would say, key stakeholders that we did identify earlier on that were key to supporting or key to providing some information, but weren't critical in terms of being on every single meeting. So they were really, really key to come in and listening to progress or understanding the benefits after each sprint, then to give their opinion, and we'd love to be kept up to date. So it was a wider stakeholder group rather than just the core project team itself. Rob, I'm not sure if you've got anything different.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the same. Using that kind of sprint agile framework, it did allow us to include as many stakeholders as we could at the right stage in a very lean way. And one of the benefits I noticed of having these extra people in there, which included kind of IT guys and some of the kind of key stakeholders, was through the testing phase of this, because we did use the kind of same structure from a testing point of view, we did identify changes that we needed to make to the system to get it working properly. But actually in that kind of sprint environment with that kind of immediate focus upon very small sections at a time, we managed to identify issues and change requests and process those change requests. And I think within 2 or 3 sprint reviews, we managed 120 changes to the kind of process in terms of optimization. And had that been in a traditional non-agile way, that would have resulted in chains of emails, lead time to get those fixes in. But that kind of agile approach, and as you said, the stakeholders being involved, enabled us to make those changes virtually in real time.
So thank you very much for that. We have a few observations and questions in the chat. So one person said, a Gemba walk has to be at the foundation of any improvement, be it virtual or in person. Or it was actually me answering a statement by somebody else. Where it said, we have 15 offices length and breadth of the UK. Gemba walks is a topic of discussion I tend to have with our leaders, when and where to utilize the method, which adds the most value. So you recognize that, don't you?
Yeah, 100%. And I think in my summary later on, there's something that's called a non-negotiable, which is a Gemba walk for me, to understand that extent of how big your problem is, but to also to really experience and feel it, see it, breathe it in terms of what people are actually doing, before you start to think about even applying any sort of improvement or even agile approach to do that.
And I've got 2 questions. I'll ask them in the reverse order first. So one question specifically to stakeholders. How did you manage to get stakeholders involved who did not know the agile way of working, and what was expected by them?
So I think for me, and Rob, you were part of this as well, but I think for me it was one, using a standard stakeholder matrix. Again, nothing major there, to articulate who should be involved and what part they would play in it. And then I think, again, depending on the outcome of that stakeholder matrix, I would then have a session with the team and those stakeholders, and I would run them through, again, what Agile was and how it's going to play a part, and kind of educate them to start with, so they weren't going in blind, to be honest. And then, again, it was continually through the use of the Agile cadence, the huddles, etc. It was, again, on-the-job training and coaching, to be fair, with those types of stakeholders that, again, allowed us to be aligned where possible.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave the next question for a little bit later, but thank you.
Cool. No, great questions to keep them coming. Thank you. So the so what, I've called it. Yeah, so it's all good and well. We follow an improvement cycle. We apply lean tools and techniques. We've applied Agile. So what? What have the benefits been? And I'm going to split this into two parts. So the first part, I'm going to let you hear from some of the process managers and operators, 60-second clip each. So we'll first hear from Emily, then we'll go to Lisa, and then Anne-Christine. So hopefully the sound works. Give me a thumbs up, Dennis, if it works. Hopefully it does.
And before you start,
yeah,
any comments or observations from anybody who listens to this, please share in the chat what are you learning from the feedback from the users and the customers of this process.
Thank you, Dennis.
So as a process operator, I have really enjoyed working on this project, and I felt the project would be a real positive to my team and make the onboarding process much more efficient. However, I was unsure how we were going to complete major changes whilst continuing to keep our current process running. But following an agile approach, a key benefit from the start was that the project was broken down into work streams and into manageable pieces called sprints. Each sprint owner could then focus on their part of the process without being overwhelmed by the project as a whole. We held weekly sprint reviews and fortnightly sprint showcases, which as part of the Agile framework gave us the ability to feedback and oversee other elements of the project. The sprint approach meant my part of the process felt much more manageable and allowed us to continually assess everyone's progress. It reduced unnecessary email communication and meetings, as each step could be shared and aligned with other sprint owners. We could quickly adapt to challenges and improvement as we went along. As a team, it helped to stay focused and has enabled the new process to be implemented with minimal disruption whilst continuing to operate our previous process, which is now being phased out.
Perfect. So Emily, if you are listening, thank you very much. Yeah, and we'll move on now and hear from Lisa.
I think the biggest difference we noticed while working on an Agile project was that although we knew all the individual work streams, the sprints were divided into smaller tasks that could be completed in conjunction with other task owners in that week. The weekly calls gave us the opportunity to come together and allowed each of the work streams to provide progress on their completed work and an insight into what was still in progress. This allowed areas of dependency between the work streams to be managed on a very light touch basis. The sprint reviews channeled everyone together, making this much more lean so the project could be managed in one activity, rather than having multiple emails and meetings with individual process owners, making it easier to stay on track. Also, if any issues were raised, they were discussed during this time, enabling us to make decisions quickly because process operators and stakeholders were present. The project sponsor being involved in the sprint showcase helped keep us on track with these decisions without any delay and enabled a fully flexible approach with a sense of ownership and collective pop-ups on it.
Amazing. Thanks again, Lisa. And last but not least, let's hear from Anne-Christine. See what Anne-Christine's got to say.
So following an agile approach did help the team improve and simplify our internal process in several ways. The interactive nature of agile allowed us to continually improve the process rather than wait until the end of the project. We continued with an agile approach into the testing and implementation phase. This has meant that we have made many small changes along the way to ensure the success of the project. The sprints enabled us to reflect on what was working and what was not working well, so we could reduce unnecessary steps to simplify the process. As an example, over the course of 2 weeks, we implemented no less than 120 changes to allow further improvement. Everyone involved in the project participated in the sprint showcases, which meant that efficient changes or decisions could be discussed, agreed, captured, and implemented promptly. This allowed us to work faster and with more clarity, improving our overall efficiency.
Thank you, Anne-Christine. Dennis?
So wonderful. So before we move on to the end section, what is your key takeaway from this?
Rob, would you like to go first this time?
Well, I think the thing that comes over for me is that you can get a sense of their engagement in the process, but you can also get a sense of the ownership that was going on in that sense. And I think, giving these guys the opportunity to do their day job and participate to such a level in this project, you can kind of hear that engagement and ownership coming through loud and clear, I think.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I think personally for me, Dennis, bit of a different answer. But for me, because I worked with these guys so closely through the Agile kind of structure and cadence, that it was just so pleasing to see how they grew as people, as well as process operators, but as well as adapting to this methodology. I could see smiles on faces. I could hear people enjoying themselves. There was conflict, but in the right way. They could trust each other. They took accountability for their own actions. They worked together. So there were so many positives that I could hear, but also feel when I was part of these sessions as well. So it's great to hear the guys' feedback from their own experience.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Great. So not just to our people, let me just skip past those videos again. Let's go back to measures and performance. So Rob introduced us earlier on to the baseline and the measures that we did or didn't have. So Rob, if you don't mind taking everyone through now the measures we have now, as well as something maybe that we added to the process.
Yeah, looking at the measures now, you can see that we still have the kind of status reporting that shows delegate stages against each of the program, but actually it's been automated. So there's no manual weekly crashing of data. As a result of it being automated, it's visible across the company. So for us, it's the same tool that we used before, but created in a lot more real-time kind of visible sense. And rather than counting physical numbers, it reduces both those kind of output charts. You will notice that it's quite small fonts and pictures there. And at this stage, we would normally share some real-time results from the project. But currently, we're running both bits of the project, both the old process and the new process at the same time. We kind of phase that out. So we're still at that kind of baseline point. But we've also added in some process measures now. So looking at this, we are able now, as a result of the kind of information that's being produced from these dashboards, look at the number of learner steps that are being completed within a day and a week. So it will quickly identify any kind of potential bottlenecks that are arising, any kind of issues within that process. It does give us real-time data now about those learners that have exited the onboarding process. And it does give us information, even though we think we've addressed a lot of the issues, on the learners effectively didn't launch on the program they started when they were at the outset of the project. So for us, it's allowed us to get some kind of real process measures in there that we can look at in real time and avoid any other potential issues.
Yeah, no, I agree. And just to add to that, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, so apologies, Rob, but I think now the moving away from manual updates of spreadsheets to this dashboard in Power BI, it's also available to the wider audience as well, the wider group of stakeholders, that we can now utilise that information to be able to easily find exactly where somebody is on their journey as well. So it's been really, really useful in that aspect as well. Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. So, final part of the journey, and again, Rob, I'm going to bring you back. I did say I had a final question for you, but I've got another final question for you, and maybe another one. I don't know, but let's just go with it. So, the final part of the improvement cycle was looking to the control phase, standardising and reviewing. So, again, some of the standard stuff. We wanted to communicate the new process. We wanted to train it, understand gaps in skills and knowledge, and then we wanted to put a standard in place by creating some standard operating procedures, which we're currently, again, just working through finishing at the moment. And we held a lessons learned session to understand what went well and what the challenges were and what we'd do differently next time. But there is a question, Rob, that I'll ask you, and the question for me is, why do you think it is important that the process operators or the managers are not only trained in the new process, but they are operating it to a standard way of working, is my question.
Okay. I mean, in my past experience, it's often the case that the implementation of a project or a system is seen as the finishing line. So you kind of start an improvement project with a dusty copy of the process on a shelf, and at the end of that kind of project, you finish with a cleaner copy of the process on the same shelf, effectively. But that's kind of where they are. And for me, our project, Mark, that we worked on did identify different ways of working, and it did establish best practice as a result of the work that we did. But it's really important that the kind of process documentation at a few levels captures that, from a process procedure, even work instruction point of view, because you need those kind of documents to keep that kind of process being maintained. So it's important from a consistency of customer experience point of view. It's important from a new starter kind of training point of view. But it's also quite important that those documents are then used in process and are dynamic. So any changes that kind of get picked up kind of flow back into that same routine, really. So for me, having that documented, having that agreed, and maintaining that position is really important as a way of kind of standardizing ways of working.
Spot on. Amazing. Thank you again. And I think there is one final question next, but we'll go to that next. Great. Thank you. So again, probably final topic before we summarise today's session and finish up. I've named this things to consider, practical takeaways to support anyone that's listening with any future improvement initiative. So what's some of these hints or tips that myself and Rob can give based on the experience that we've had? Again, it wasn't perfect. Nobody will always apply it in the same way, but here's some hints and tips that hopefully will help people on their journey to utilise in both Agile and Lean Six Sigma together. So the first one, and this is where I will come back to you, Rob, kindly. So it says here, before rushing off to embed the Agile framework, what I say is first consider the context of this in your own world. Yeah, so what does it actually mean to you and to your own world and your organisation, and how can it practically be applied? Because what we've done might be totally different to what maybe you need to do. So Rob, you had a bit of passion around about this, and you wanted to share something. Yeah,
we had the opportunity of a bit of pre-warning about this earlier, didn't we? And for me, it's maybe a kind of negative angle, but we talked a lot about how managing business as usual and delivering the project was kind of realised by using the Agile principles, Mark, that you kind of implemented. But when you, Mark, first suggested an Agile approach, it kind of didn't land as obviously as a fit as you might think, really. And I think Agile has a kind of different meaning to different people, from a very broad set of kind of principles right the way down for a very narrow set of kind of operating methodology, really. And I think often improvement practitioners can talk about Agile and principles in a kind of language of your own. And I think it's important when you talk to kind of people within a project, you talk about what Agile is, what it means, and what you're intending to do. Only that you may need to use a different language, whether you're talking to a project sponsor, another practitioner, or even people like myself that are kind of process operators. So it's important that the kind of context of Agile and those intentions are used in the same conversation, I think.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Rob. Perfect. So my second hint or tip is virtual platforms. So we use one such called Miro, which again, people may have heard of. But if you're delivering workshops or you're delivering an extensive project and you can't make it into the office, a virtual platform like Miro is such a great tool to use. You know, it's easy to use, it's collaborative, and it helps to document and share progress. So that became really, really handy, not just for me, but again, to deliver this as an overall team. We spoke about this earlier on, Dennis. You asked me the question that somebody had. So Gemba walks, yeah. So observing the real process is a non-negotiable, yeah. So without them, you never do fully understand the extent of the problem that you're trying to solve. So, like my old line manager said many years ago, go and get your hands dirty where you can, and experience what other people experience who are doing it day in, day out. It definitely helps. More to the Agile way again now, so adopting that sprint approach at an improve phase felt the right area for me and the team to follow Agile, because it helped ensure that those bigger solutions, those epics as we kind of named them, could be then broken down into smaller deliverables that can be effectively managed and delivered, which you heard from Emily, Lisa, and from Anne-Christine, and how helped their confidence in terms of delivery. And finally, PDSA should always remain at the heart of everything you do when you are utilising both Lean Six Sigma and Agile tools together. So those are my key hints and tips that hopefully will be useful to the majority of people listening today. But yeah, before we summarise, Dennis, I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add. If not, I can hand over to Rob to do as a quick summary from a customer and a team member perspective.
So there was one question. Would you have a recommendation for applying these combined methodologies on improvement initiatives from a small size internal audit department due to the nature of traditional project management methodology chosen in such an environment?
Wow.
So where would you start?
Question. Yeah, that is
so where would you start? Huh?
To be honest, and again, this may be the right answer, it may not be, but for me, I think no matter where you work, what size of problem you've got, I think both of these methodologies can always be applied. Yeah, no matter if it's a small problem or a big problem, you still need to define it. You need to select your priorities. You still need to form a team. And again, there is that essence of Agile that again can be brought in. For me, again, at the stage when you're thinking about changes. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's helpful, but I'm thinking, yeah, I don't think there is a right or wrong answer to it. It's just about using the right methodology with any size of problem. I think it can work.
Yeah, and
Excellent.
I think for me, Dennis, if the person that raised that question is lucky enough to have everybody in that project that is full time in that project, then I could probably understand the question. But if they're not and they're relying on other resources and other people which are not full time in that project, then for me, structuring that from a resource planning point of view and applying that, I think, is only going to provide benefit back from a project delivery point of view.
Lovely, thank you. So to summarize then.
Yes, Rob, I'll hand over to you to finish off the session.
Yeah, so with your okay, I'll try and apply a kind of customer view of the key points.
No problem. You've done a great job so far.
So structured methodology. Yeah, I mean, PMI have a structured methodology, but for those of us normally engaged in the process rather than in the kind of improvement cycle of this, to kind of see that structure from the start, you kind of know the destination and you kind of know the plan, you know the path you're going to take to get to that destination, really. So having that kind of structured approach is really important for people that aren't necessarily used to improvement projects in their day-to-day life. Forming the team. Yeah, we've talked quite a lot about this, I think. Different roles, full-time, part-time, but to me, forming that team right from the start with that kind of purpose we've just talked about is a really key point. Lean and Agile tools working together. Yeah, we know that for us, amalgamating those two together and applying a structure with that was the route that kind of get us through that with the team that we found. So yeah, they absolutely do work together in harmony, really. Agile meeting cadence allows collaboration. Yeah, I mean, for me, I was one of the workstream leads, Mark, that you defined. There was lots of dependencies between those work streams, but that kind of really agile meeting cadence allowed all those interdependencies, all those potential risks to come together right in a very kind of lean way, really, for me. So meeting cadence really important to put the agile basis into that. And yeah, to change outcomes you don't like. I mean, many people start a project with kind of preconceived ideas about what the problems are and what the solutions are, but you've got to follow the process. As you say, Mark, Gemba for you is an absolute must. And you've got to use all of the data that comes out of that to then assess what the problems are and assess those solutions. So for me, yeah, you may reach some of those outcomes that you didn't expect, and you may reach some of those outcomes you actually didn't like, but you have got to follow that process. So that's my voice of the customer view of your key points, really.
Wonderful to hear that. And if I may just come back to one point made earlier, we have to speak the language of the organization and within which we operate.
Yeah.
What do they understand about that problem? What do they understand about the meaning of the word agile in the broader sense at all levels of the organization? And therefore, that's what you're going to work with to make sure that they have, from a psychology point of view, the shortest distance between what you want to accomplish and the acceptance by your audience of changes.
Agree.
Cool. So thank you very much. So, and finally, so thank you, first of all, thank you both, Mark and Rob, for sharing this fantastic case study about combining both Agile and Lean Six Sigma in a single project with a positive outcome that has delighted not only the internal customers, but also made it easier for the external customers to have a far better experience. So in terms of PMI, we're 40 years young, we don't stand still. The same thing with our certified, now Agile Lean Six Sigma Green Belts. We are continuously evolving what we offer to you. And in this case, we've now combined this. So we've taken the best of all these methods into a single green belt. So be it on demand, distance, virtual classroom, or physical classroom, whatever your demand is. So learn more by going to our training section on our website. Finally, the learning continues. We're going to have some more thought leadership. So you have a whole host of resources here, so including the blogs. We see Mark here in the middle with a podcast, and on the right-hand side, we see Sean talking about Greenbelt tools and Pack for Punch. So go and stick in the search what you want to look for, and then go and find what applies to your specific situation. And finally, next month, we're going to have another webinar where Mark will be again in the hot seat together with Sean Buckland for Game On, engage your team for team transformation and performance, which will all be about gamification to maximize engagement, maximizing motivation, and also injecting energy into improvement initiatives. So register on our website, going to the webinar section on pmi.co.uk for the 28th of March. And finally, please look out for the Voice of Customer survey that will be emailed to you. Tell us what you thought about today, what did you enjoy, and also any topics for future webinars you would like us to focus on. In which case, I would say to all of you, thank you very much for attending. And thank you again to Mark and Rob for preparing and showcasing this fantastic result. And we'll see you at the next PMI Live.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
Dennis. Cheers, guys.
Bye.